brilliant. And actually, we're missing out on bags of talent that could have been sat around the cabinet table with me, um, doing a brilliant job. And so there's a bit of this that is culture. You're right. And I think that part of this is raising expectations of what we can all do with our lives. I've always said when I was 10, I wanted to be the first person in my family to go to university. I ended up sat around a cabinet table with somebody who, when he was 10, he wanted to be world king, which was Boris Johnson. And I think, in a really stark way, it sets out our different expectations of what was possible for us as we were young children. But I think to change culture and change expectations, it's got to be real, hasn't it? People aren't just going to dream. They've got to see role models and feel like they really can get around the cabinet table, or they really can get around the boardroom table. I think that's when it'll really start to change.
Justine, thank you so much for making time to speak on the Social Mobility Commission website today. I'd like to start things off by just asking you about your own experience of social mobility and what's prompted you to care so much about this subject.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the podcast. I think social mobility has been part of my life. I grew up in a very working class family in Rotherham, and at a time when there weren't opportunities around, actually. So I think understanding the value of opportunity is something that I've always known firsthand, very directly. I didn't plan to go into politics, but it was amazing to end up having the chance to do that and to become Education Secretary. And so I think that role particularly really helped me see the wider systemic opportunity to improve social mobility. And so now that's what I do through my work leading the Purpose Coalition, is just really getting employers in particular to play their role in thinking more strategically about how opportunities that they've got can change lives.
And we've spoken about this before, but I always find it fascinating when I meet people like you. And one of the reasons I'm so eager to talk to you is because this idea that you can come from a working class background such as yours and I guess such as my own, and end up round that cabinet table and end up as a Secretary of State. I mean, was there any point when you were sat around that table or in those sorts of environments where you sort of had to pinch yourself, or was the ascent sort of sufficiently gradual that you had milestones along the way and you got familiar with it, or is it always jarring in some ways to suddenly find yourself in the positions that you've held?
It's a really good question, because I think I was always very aware that these were senior roles that affected millions of lives. So I think if I was a bit trepidatious, when you initially get put into them, I think it's mainly because I understood how important they were. And I never felt that I shouldn't be doing them. And in fact, as I went through my time in politics, I gradually realized that I was probably at least as if not more capable of doing these roles as anyone else. And so, no, I think there is this issue of imposter syndrome, I think, for all of us. And certainly when I went into cabinet, it's a massive step up to go from being a minister to then leading a whole department. But in the end, it's just an incredible privilege to be able to do that. So no, I felt fine. And on imposter syndrome, I think I steadily began to realize that actually this is a good thing. I was learning things. That's why I felt outside my comfort zone. And if I wasn't like some of the other people in the room or around the table with me, again, that was a good thing, because I was like most people. So we need most people there, not just some people who have the most privileged start. So no, I felt fine. And I guess above all, I never felt like I didn't feel I deserved to be there, because I patently did. If you start where I started, or where you start, and you get to that level, then you really definitely are good enough, because you've had to make all of your connections and steps forward on merit.
It's so interesting, and one of the things that we think about a lot of the Social Mobility Commission is the role of culture, and there's got to be a better way of explaining that. But for me, it means the role of sort of parents and mentors or teachers and so on. Did you face any resistance when you decided to embark on the professional career that you did? And did anyone sort of, I'm sure no one did, but we know that in some cases there's a sense of, to a young person who's ambitious, why do you want to move away? Why do you want to go to university? That's not what we do. And I guess I'm crudely framing that. It's often a bit more, not as direct, I guess, one of a better phrase. Did you experience any of that, or did you have the opposite? Was there someone supporting you along the way?
Well, I think as ever, it's a mix, isn't it? I was incredibly lucky because I had two incredible supportive parents who provided a really stable home, loved me, always encouraged me. I think more widely, yeah, I remember when I was heading off to university and someone we knew through the family said, "Not good enough for you, are we then, Justine?" And I remember saying, "No, no, it's not that at all." But yeah, just little things like that in a way where I think sometimes one of the unwritten stories around social mobility is just that it can be quite isolating because you're making your own way. De facto, you're often with other people who aren't like you rather than are with like you that are like you, because you're kind of the exception. And I think one of the things we really need to remember is I think it's great. We absolutely celebrate all these journeys. They really matter. But I think sometimes, they're quite lazily used by maybe a wider media to say, "Oh, look at this person. She's done brilliantly. Isn't that amazing?" Well, yeah, it is. But I am the exception that proves the rule. And, there was a great piece of research that came out earlier this year by the Sutton Trust that was really clear that people who are privately educated populate more of those senior roles across our country now, not less. So I think we should be celebrating the journeys, but I think we should also recognise that they are far too infrequent, and actually we're missing out on bags of talent that could have been sat around the cabinet table with me, doing a brilliant job. And so there's a bit of this that is culture. You're right. And I think that part of this is raising expectations of what we can all do with our lives. I've always said when I was 10, I wanted to be the first person in my family to go to university. I ended up sat around a cabinet table with somebody who, when he was 10, he wanted to be world king, which was Boris Johnson. And I think, in a really stark way, it sets out our different expectations of what was possible for us as we were young children. But I think to change culture and change expectations, it's got to be real, hasn't it? People aren't just going to dream. They've got to see role models and feel like they really can get around the cabinet table, or they really can get around the boardroom table. I think that's when it'll really start to change people's sense of where they can get to, is when they see more people like them already there. But it's that change process of how you make that happen that's so important, which is why it should worry all of us that we are actually, at the moment, it looks moving a bit backwards on all of that. There are fewer people around that table that look like me, you, now than perhaps there were 10 years ago plus.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I really want to come back to that Sutton Trust report in a moment. But I'm interested in what you think about current social mobility interventions in policy terms. Are there any that you think really work, and any or any that sort of need to be looked at again? I suppose the reason I asked this is when I became a social mobility commissioner, the data really jumps out at you, I guess, when you have access to the reports that the Commission produces. And one of the things that we found is that so many interventions sort of still go after the lucky few, if you like. The ones who are perhaps, through hard work, maybe a bit of luck, maybe just fantastic parents, maybe a great teacher, they're probably heading towards university. They're probably going to be okay. It's not to say that the work of a charity or someone in the social mobility sector won't nudge them up and support them, but they'll probably be okay. And what we found is that the bottom 20%, are still rigidly, with the very few exceptions, stuck in that bottom 20%. So I'd be really interested if there's any interventions that you've seen in your time in government or since that really stand out, and others where you think actually we need to look at this again.
I think the challenge in government is to understand that this is complicated and government isn't good at dealing with complexity, I don't think, in my experience. So different places need different blends of strategies, different people need different blends of strategies. People in that bottom 20% are in that 20% with all sorts of different circumstances. Interestingly, if you asked me about my childhood, I would say, oh, my school, local comprehensive, was in a really nice bit of Rotherham. But if you go and find out what IMT decile it's in, it's number 3. And if you ask ChatGPT, it'll say that 99% of households in England have a higher average salary than people in that area. But as I said earlier, I was blessed with amazing parents. And so I think different children have different challenges, and we're not good at spotting that complexity. If this was a business, a company, you'd segment your customer base, you'd realize they all like different things, and then you'd be providing them slightly different products. So I think for policy, you need place-based approaches. I obviously deployed this opportunity area concept when I was Education Secretary. I think devolution now means that we've got a better chance of more tailored, place-based, tailored policy now than we've perhaps had in the past. I still think that on that people side of the matrix, we've got probably quite a long way to go, and I feel that the final piece of this is, in practice, if I'm being tough on government and Whitehall and politics, is lack of ambition. When I used to see strategies that would halve this gap, say on maths, or, reduce this by X percentage, I mean, clearly it's half a strategy. So that's why we don't get to that. That's why we don't get to that bottom percent, or we target right at the bottom, and then we miss everyone who, is maybe just above that cutoff level. So we just need to have a more comprehensive approach and recognize that social mobility is for everyone, not just some places and some people. And finally, you need to stick at it for the long term. There have been effective policies. I think opportunity areas is one of them. It's definitely not the only one. Policies around early years, but there's just too much chopping and changing, and too many new governments that want to have new strategies, and in the end, throw out the baby with the bathwater, sort of lose all the good stuff that the other government might have been doing just because it wasn't their stuff. And, in the end, maybe that's politics, but I do think it also means that each successive government doesn't get as far as it could do had it kept the good stuff and then fused on its even better stuff, as it would see it.
Yeah. Do you think that's because of a lack of consensus across the parties on social mobility, or just or is it just the case that different politicians have different ideas and therefore don't stick with what's been agreed before?
Sometimes it's a lack of consensus. I think for the most part, it's the need to have your policy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also down to the fact that probably not enough policy is brutally evidence driven.
Yeah.
And so if it was, you would literally be looking across, working out your bang for the buck. And, my ideal as a Secretary of State was always to be able to answer the question, if I've got £1 more to spend, to invest, I should know where I'm going to put it and why and what I'm going to get out of it. And I think probably too much spend is almost politically shaped, when actually, frankly, particularly for things like education and social mobility, they're just social questions that require investment, and we already know what works. And a lot of my purpose coalition work is showing what businesses do that works. It's not a big, massive political debate. It's just a question of finding the solutions and then deploying them and tailoring them in different communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to pick up on the role of business shortly, but going back to the Sutton Trust report and your description of being around a cabinet table with someone who very much thought that he ought to be there for sure.
Set his sights
Um,
high.
yeah, yeah, that's great.
Only
I'm
ended up running Britain.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. The power of belief, I guess, and a very fortunate upbringing. Um, I'm interested in your thoughts on the debate between university and apprenticeships. We're in Freshers Week, and I think at the Commission we've always taken the view that for those who are able to go to university, fantastic, great. I think all of us have benefited from that sort of journey. Um, but for those who, for whatever reason, don't want to or choose not to or whatever, um, how do we get to a point where apprenticeships are held in the same esteem as the university route? And it seems like we're moving in that direction gradually as a society. There's the idea that you can have a great career as an apprentice and all that, but I'm struck by that Sutton Trust report, as it, by the sounds of it, you are too, that the people who run the country effectively still went to university. How do we get around that, and what are your thoughts on that debate?
Well, I think it's about choice, isn't it? And so again, this is such an interesting area where you see politics getting in the way of sensible decision making. The reality is that people need a choice, and for me, university was always almost certainly the best choice. Not just because I knew what I wanted to study, because I loved economics, but also because I hadn't got a clue what I wanted to do. So if you'd asked me to pick an apprenticeship, I wouldn't have known which one, and I wouldn't have known which company. So I almost certainly would have made the wrong choice. And you've got to realize that we need to build those pathways, those alternate pathways. I think there's a third one that's totally missing, which is entrepreneurship. And what if you want to start your own company? What if you don't want to work for someone else or keep studying? But setting that aside, I think it's about building those pathways and then making sure that young people and adults have really good advice around how to make those choices, because otherwise the pathways will be there, but they won't know how to pick. I think in practice, again, I can think of someone like Clive Higgins, who's now CEO of Leonardo, started off way back when in Western Helicopters as an apprentice. So I think there are those people there who have made that route forward. But as you say, a lot of people still want to go to university, and a lot of people who get to the top have been to university. And therefore, I think it's quite hard for people who've already had that opportunity to turn around to this generation and go, oh, what a waste of money, don't do that. Because again, it comes back to my point that just doesn't sound right to a lot of people, because when they look at who's earning the most in society and who's done the best, they all tend to have been to university. So you're not going to change that overall quickly, but it's about building up those alternative pathways, and then making sure people have the right choices. But I think we are seeing a shift though. So in a sense, I'm less worried about that, because I think even in the last 10 years, it's been, there's a significant shift in attitudes towards the choices that are there. And I think we just need to keep going on that journey of scaling up the breadth and the offer of apprenticeships. And I think giving employers more flexibility to develop them as well. I think it's a shame that we took away the levy being able to be funded for level 7 apprenticeships, because in a world where people do need to reskill and we want them to do that, and they might not have had a chance to get to university themselves, actually, more flexibility for employers on how they invest, and increasing that investment full stop, for me, is probably going to be money well spent.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I found it interesting. I think it was the CEO of Reed, the recruitment company, saying that graduate jobs are down significantly. I can't remember the percentage, but really significantly just in the last few years. So perhaps there'll be a need to respond to the market anyway. Like perhaps it will be.
But that doesn't mean we should have a nation of less educated people. And these are the kinds of I think pieces of information that are latched on to. I'm not saying you're doing that at all, actually, but wrongly. Doesn't mean less people go to university. What it means is actually lower skilled roles are becoming automated again, AI. In other words, we need human capital to move up the skills chain to become even more skilled. So this is basically saying maybe university needs to change.
Yeah.
But actually, are we going to get out of this challenge on massive waste of human capital across the UK through people being less educated? No, definitely not. They need to be more educated in the right skills and connected up to strong opportunities. But all of this debate is how do we do more, not less.
Yeah, I find that so interesting. I think that's the first time I've heard that. I almost see it as a bridge, what you've described, because it always seems to me that the debate is, well, how do we continue studying theology and history and classics? And then on the other side, you hear quite rightly people say, well, actually, we've got enough of those graduates. How do we, and I think what you've just articulated is a bridge between the two almost. You still get educated, you still put yourself in a position to compete with your peers from other G7 countries and so on, but you do so in a way that is appealing to employers and the needs of the 21st century. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, you just need to connect employers right all the way through the education system. Right, ideally right from primary, but certainly from secondary onwards. I still find it odd that having, I think, done so well at bringing employers into shaping apprenticeships, somehow we think that the GCSE curriculum is something set aside from the rest of that education, that it is just academic. So they, literally, there's no need to have it applied. Well, there absolutely is. And there are some schools that are doing applied education, even in primary, brilliantly. And those are the ones we should be learning from, because what they're doing is not only helping to teach that sort of knowledge-rich curriculum, but they're also crucially fusing in teaching skills, attitudes, behaviors that are actually what we'll need. And in a sense, the world that we're already in, but that we're rapidly moving in, the people and the companies that will do the best are the ones that are able to add that spark of ingenuity beyond what AI can do. And that requires probably a different kind of an education system to the one we've got now, which frankly is increasingly and rapidly, if it wasn't already, a rearview mirror on just knowing stuff. People do need to know stuff, but it's not enough.
Yeah.
And if you're not able to think laterally, work in a team, problem solve, take what AI is giving you and then overlay some human ingenuity on top of it to make it that bit better, that's what we should be worried about not being able to achieve for our people. I think the change now is, COVID was obviously damaging for lots of children's education, but you've now got this time-based issue of AI, and you're not going to be able to just get away with having an education system that doesn't get children to where we want them to get to, but it's okay because they can just go and do some lower paid, lower skilled role. That's not going to be on offer. So we have to have people reach their potential. It's not a nice to have. It's never been just a nice to have. It's absolutely essential for Britain.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I often think that one of the best things I learned at university was the ability to think critically. And actually, in the age of AI and misinformation and disinformation, I always think that's something that we almost need more of rather than less. But I really want to ask you about
plus all the social stuff
and the social stuff.
It was my world, my sense of the world, of opportunity, of different people was fundamentally changed by being plonked into Southampton University. You can't overestimate how much those experiences reshape people in a really positive way and set their sights higher. And I think that I'd argue that going to university is still one of the most powerful ways of driving social mobility, if not the most powerful way of driving social mobility we've got, because there is no other experience that so systematically reshapes people's sense of what they can do. I think, than going to university. But I'm sure that debate will rumble on. Anyway, sorry, back over
Yeah.
to you.
No, no, not at all. No, I completely agree. I completely agree with that. I'm really interested in the role of business and your work at Purpose, because often, again, I think we're all, perhaps not you, but many of us are guilty of this. We think of the role of government, we think of the role of the third sector, we think of the role of families, but we don't often think of the role of business in this debate. So could you say a bit more about that?
I just think every company has opportunities. I mean, we're doing education for people, not exclusively, that's not the whole objective of education, but perhaps a major one is to help them be in a position to connect to opportunities. And so you have to bring in the people who've got the opportunities, who are the businesses for the most part. And so what we're doing is getting ideally every business in Britain to have a strategic plan on social mobility in the way that they'd have one on sustainability. I want them to do people as well as planet. And I think unless you can get companies to think differently about this and to play their role, I think we can only get so far on driving equality of opportunity. So again, this is essential. There's these two halves that we were talking about when I was at the DFE. If you look at my social mobility action plan, aside from saying we needed a leveled up Britain, it also said Britain's problem was that talent was spread evenly, opportunity was not. And that phrase mattered because it articulated two halves of a social mobility challenge. One half being talent spread evenly, not developed consistently. That's an education challenge. The second half being an opportunity is not spread evenly, and that's an employer challenge. So the Purpose Coalition is really bringing businesses together to work individually and collectively on those social mobility plans. And I think in doing so, they can genuinely change the social norm. And yeah, I want to see every single company with a social mobility strategy.
Yeah, and I mean, I appreciate every business is different, but do you find that businesses that do engage because they see it as part of their corporate responsibility almost, or do they also acknowledge or recognize that there's, it's good business, right, to have the best people? And how do you find their reaction?
I think I think to be frank, it's both of those things. There's a massive talent crunch, and there are these incredible careers that employers still can't find talent for. I mean, it's crazy that at a time when you have food banks, there are these amazing jobs that can't be filled
Mm.
across the board, public and private sector. So that's the first thing. And I think that's become particularly acute over recent years. But I also think that there are lots of people in business like me who understand the power of opportunity, what it can do to change lives, and want their companies to be part of that push. They think they're going to get to a bigger talent pool, and that's how they're going to win. So I did an event with Clyde and Co, which is a law and advisory firm based in London, but offices all over. And as one of their senior partners put it, why would you not want to choose from a bigger squad? Like literally every football team needs a big squad. Why would you not want to have a big squad? Like, show me the teams that win that have got the small squad. That's all we're saying. And I think smart companies realize that. And I think in time, if you're an investor, actually, I think investors are beginning to realize that actually, if you're only fishing in half a talent pool and you're a HGV firm, then yeah, probably your salaries are going to go through the roof compared to competitors who are more able to fish across the board. Ditto engineers, all those sorts of roles that maybe have been more biased towards, in that case, men. Literally, you're cutting out half your talent pool. You are going to lose compared to a business that has worked out how to get to the other half of it. It is as simple as that. So I think there's a business imperative. And I think it's one of those times where what business needs to do is really now aligned with what government needs to achieve in terms of social change.
Yeah, yeah. My last question is, I guess it's related to everything that we've discussed. Do you find you meet resistance when you talk about social mobility? And I guess the reason I ask is, um, you know, I think in the age of social media, there's a more robust way of campaigning and having these conversations. It's not one that I try to subscribe to. I still prefer to have the one-on-one conversation. But I guess if we look at some campaigners, they would say, well, this person is in this role because of privilege, which may be true. But I always think if you want that person to change or adopt a different policy in their workplace, probably best not to wind them up or make them feel like their whole life has been handed to them on a silver spoon or whatever the phrase is. So how do you, I mean, do you meet much resistance like that? If you do you have any tips or advice for those of us who are working in this space about how to have a fruitful chat rather than a confrontation?
I think what everybody's got to realize is that one of the reasons Britain is in facing the challenges it does is because we just haven't used our talents. And talent really is spread evenly. And I think you either believe that or you don't. And I certainly do. But to people who don't, then, I think it's going to be quite a rocky future because talent really is spread evenly. And a wider country absolutely now finds it unacceptable that where you start can so shape where you get to. And if you're somebody who perhaps has had a great start, had a more privileged start, then if you think what opportunity's done for your life, it's not a zero-sum game. Think how much better Britain would be if everyone gets their talent unlocked. Think how many more businesses are going to be set up that your kids might be able to get a role in. Literally, more people doing well is how we all do better. It's not a zero-sum game. And I think the sooner people understand that me doing better and my kids doing better doesn't mean their kids do worse. I mean, literally, I think things are going to change, and I'd really encourage people to be part of helping to make it happen because it'll be a way better version of Britain where everybody can reach their potential. And dare I say, I think it'll be how we fix our public finances because it's lives off track that cost all of us money, setting aside the impact on those lives, not lives that are on track, successful, happy, and contributing. And so, whether all you care about is low tax or, your kids' opportunities, if that's the only thing on your mind, then you should get on this thing of social mobility because it's how how your kids are going to get more opportunities. And it's also how you're going to end up with a virtuous circle of successful people and low tax Britain.
Yeah, it's such a fantastic place to finish, and I think a real different way of framing the debate too, which is what we need because we need to reach all sorts of audiences. And the things I've jotted down earlier on in our conversation, the role of place, the role of evidence. Again, I in addition to the bridge as I see it between the debate on the one hand about university and the debate on the other about apprenticeships. Justine, thank you so much for being part of this. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me on.